everybody. I am HP Holo. I write stuff, but today I am going to be speaking with another writer of stuff. Today I have Kevin Ikenberry with me. His most recent book is The Crossing, and I'm just going to let you take it away, Kevin. Tell us a little bit about your writing, where we can find it, etc. If you're doing any contests, all that fun stuff.
Sure. So I'm Kevin Ikenberry. I write primarily military science fiction. The Crossing is an alternate history, which we're going to talk a lot about as we go through the course of the next hour. I've written 20 books with a couple of different publishers, including a Protocol War series and in the Four Horsemen universe from Chris Kennedy Publishing. You can find me on my Amazon author page, Facebook, author Kevin Ikenberry. I'm on Twitter at the writer Ike. I'm pretty much anywhere you can buy books, you can find me. So it's a pretty good way to start.
Nice and easy to find. All right. I have a little ticker made that I'm going to bring over here. So there's your website. There's Bain.com. There's information about what he has written. So there you go. If you ever get lost about where you are while you're watching, it's all down here. So my first question for you, Kevin. Now, as you've said, most of what you've written before in the past is military sci-fi of the futuristic variety. What made you want to delve into the past for this book?
So like most authors, when I was really getting started, I would just kind of scribble down ideas in notebooks and whatnot. And one day I had an idea about, and it's kind of a longer story. We have this running joke in my family that I was probably 4 or 5 years old and swore up and down to my parents that I was present when George Washington crossed the Delaware. And it's just kind of been one of those things that we've always kind of kicked around and laughed about. But one of the ideas I wrote down was, what if the coin that Washington reputedly threw across the Delaware was actually a bicentennial quarter?
Ooh.
And I wrote that idea down, thought nothing about it. And then I met Eric Flint in 2014. And I asked him, I said, what do I do with this idea? How do I do this? And he was like, let's go to lunch tomorrow. And so we go to lunch, and we started talking.
That's such a perfect imitation of Eric, too. All right, continue. Sorry.
I know it used to make him just crazy when I would do it, because he just ended up laughing and shaking his head. But we went to lunch and we started talking about this, and over the course of a couple of years, in between some illnesses, both his and mine, we were able then to come together and kind of figure out what to do. And then he told me, why don't you go ahead and write a book? And so I wrote the book, and he edited it. So nice. That was kind of the idea of delving into the past. It was not something that I ever thought I was going to do. And then when all of this kind of kept going and we got a little bit further into the story building and the research aspect of the time frame, there was a lot to play with, and it just became a very fun project.
Cool. Now, you did mention Eric Flint, of course, did have heavy involvement in this book, which actually makes this somewhat of a bittersweet release, given recent events, shall we say. But I want to know, my initial question was, how did this come to be, and what was it like working with him? But you've already kind of covered the first part. What was it like writing with Eric Flint? Because he's a legend in the genre. And
so having Eric Flint as your editor was every bit as awesome as you would think it would ever be. And he taught me an incredible amount about not just how to write alternate history, but how to write. There were a couple of things that he always talked about in the editing process, was to avoid melodrama, avoid being overly dramatic in places where you don't need to be, have the characters be realistic. And he always distilled everything down to one question. And I'll give the PG version of the question. It's, who gives a crap? His question was always, answer that with every sentence, every paragraph, every page. If you're answering that question, then you're going to have the reader immersed in what you're trying to do and pull them along into the story, which is what you're trying to do. And then when we start talking about the writing of the alternate history piece, he said so many people focus on the inciting incident, right? When something happens and people are brought into the past, if you will. And they focus on that aspect, and they don't really go into anything else. And he said the most important part of that is, if you think of the inciting incident being a drop into a still body of water, you don't look at the drop anymore. You look at the ripples, and you explore those ripples of change as they radiate outward from that event. And that's really where things go.
Mm-hmm. That actually leads me to one of the later questions that I'd meant to ask, which is, when you're writing alternate history, how do you decide what changes? How do you decide where the ripples go?
It's hard, it's something where you look at what you're trying to do with the story. At least in my case with the crossing, I'm looking at the lives of 8 Army ROTC cadets from 2008, and the different things that they're going to change just by one being there.
Right.
Two, having a different attitude, different opinion, different structure of ideas and whatnot, different knowledge levels. So all those different things that they have are going to come into play at some point in time. And I think that the biggest thing that you can do with those is just to be nuanced with how those things work. Because yes, certainly there can be the big slap in the face moment where something happens, but it's really more looking at what are the incremental changes, and not necessarily trying to do too much at the forefront, but really kind of play the long game and see just how things can develop with what you're trying to do.
Right. Excuse me, my voice went out for a little bit there. Let me see here. I'm checking off my questions so I can stay somewhat organized. Now, here's the thing for you. Now, alternate history is inevitably going to be a research-heavy genre to write in. What's the weirdest thing you had to research for The Crossing?
I don't know if I had anything that was really weird. I went back into a period of history. I was an Army officer as part of my adult life, and you study history a lot, and you learn about different things. And as I went through and really delved into what was going on in the latter part of 1776 and the run up to the Battle of Trenton and then the immediate after effects, I got into a couple of really fantastic books. Obviously, 1776 by David McCullough was huge, but then Washington's Crossing by David Hackett Fisher is a tremendous book. And I learned an incredible amount about this period because there was so much going on that we didn't learn in school. We often are taught that, at the Battle of Trenton, Washington surprised the Hessians because they were drunk. That's not the case. That wasn't the case at all. And, I remember hearing that when I was, learning history in high school and whatnot, and going back into and learning about the actual conduct of the battle and what happened. And yes, there was a lot of things with synchronicity and surprise that were on Washington's side, but there were a lot of things going on the enemy's side that he hit just at the perfect time. And it was because they had just prodded and just been relentless in the annoyance, I guess is probably the best word, the annoyance of the Hessian army and everything that was going on in northern New Jersey. It was really pretty fascinating. So delving into that and learning more about that battle and whatnot was amazing.
That's one of my favorite things about reading history too, because the thing is, in our education system, you mostly get the Cliff's Notes version of history, but when you actually start delving into things, you often find in so many events, there are so many crazy coincidental things that had to happen for a lot of history to even take place as we know it. And I think that sort of stuff is just so fascinating. We have a question from, sorry.
I was just going to say, it was fascinating for me that you talk about those pieces of history that you start coming into. That was where I started finding in niches where I could actually put in more aspects of story and more interactions with characters and whatnot. So being able to set things up between characters that might not have ever met just because of understanding what the history was.
Right. All right, we have a question from Facebook. This is from Chance Thompson, who asks, are there any Freemasonry references in the book?
No, there's not. This is pretty straightforward as far as looking at the Battle of Trenton and the immediate after effects. So we're probably talking about a little bit more than a week of real time, if you will, a few days prior to the Battle of Trenton and up to about the 2nd, 3rd of January, plus an epilogue scene that takes place about a month later. So there's really nothing that delves into any of that at this point.
All right, let's see here. What's my next question? We've covered a lot of mine already, actually. We're going fast.
I'll try to slow down.
Oh, you're fine. Are there any special techniques you use to organize your research or possible timelines that you consider when you're writing?
So this is where I say, hi, my name's Kevin. I have a notebook problem. So I had with what I was doing with research, I would sit down with the different references and I just read and have a notebook there. And I would start writing down bits and pieces, any particular key dates, key players, anyone that I wanted to potentially play with. And then as I was actually going through the writing of the manuscript, it was funny that I would be writing along and something that I had read and not necessarily written down would trigger. So I'd actually have to stop and go back and pull out a reference because it was one of those moments where, I can make a connection here. There's a connection that this person did something that Washington didn't like. Well, I can actually pull that back in and use that as something that actually takes place in the crossing. So there were a lot of those pieces that the more reading I seemed to do, the more things I picked up on that I could actually include in a realistic timeline. So it actually worked out pretty well. It was fascinating that the more things I studied, the more things I found.
Mm-hmm. Yes. All right. Oh, we got another question. This is from Larry on Facebook, who asks, did you go to any physical sites, or was it just book web research?
So most of this was web research, and also books. I mean, like the two references I counted earlier. But the good thing about looking at things from the national registries of battlefields and whatnot, there's a lot of fantastic information that you can get out there. And as I started going into the different searches, both online and in references, I was actually able then to kind of weave between different things that I could find on a historical website, tie it into the actual information in one of the books, and really kind of maybe fill in a little bit of the blanks, if you will, just to try to get a better picture of everything that was happening during the course of that battle. And it was really kind of cool to be able to put all that together. And research is just one of those things. It's you can't take one source. You've got to have multiple, and you've got to be able to kind of cross corroborate things. And that's kind of what I was doing, was just looking at what I could find in the different references, and actually then building my own, if you will, idea of what the scheme of maneuver and whatnot was like.
Cool. Oh, we got another question. Another one from Chance on Facebook, who asks, how did you gain knowledge on colonial weapon usage from range to keeping them in proper condition?
I did a lot of reading, back when I was in Boy Scouts, I was probably 14 or 15 years old. We did a reenactment. I actually lived in Tennessee growing up, and we did a reenactment at Sycamore Shoals, which was the launching base for some of the over the mountain men that fought with Nathaniel Greene at the Battle of Kings Mountain. And one of the things I remember from that was working with the muskets and whatnot. And so being able to kind of remember some of that, then go back and do a whole heck of a lot of research and a lot of reading on different things, and just trying to make sure that I was not going to overdo it, or that I was going to miss a critical aspect of it.
Right. All right. How much of your own military experience were you able to put to use in the crossing? Or really in your writing in general?
A lot. One of the things that in my military career, I actually had the opportunity to teach ROTC starting in 2008. So it was kind of fun to be able to write from that time frame and think about, not only some of the cadets that I worked with, because all of the cadets that you meet are amalgamations of different people. So being able to take that mindset that they have during the course of cadet training and whatnot, and bringing them into this book was pretty easy. But then the military aspect was pretty simple, because a lot of what the cadets are having to do before they actually get to Washington is what we call small unit tactics. And that's pretty much what every Army officer goes through training to learn, is at the squad level, how does the Army really work? And so being able to put that together and focus on those dynamics and that little bit of knowledge was really the cornerstone for this book, and how the cadets have to work together and do the things that they need to do, just like a regular Army unit would, even though they're not really in the Army. And so there was that. It's fun to be able to kind of bring all that together. And then, my experiences both teaching ROTC and then from when I was a cadet back in the day, those are some of the things that I remember very clearly to this day. I mean, I served almost 24 years, and there's things that I learned as a cadet that are still just as fresh in my mind as if I learned them yesterday.
Some things just get seared in there when you're in the military.
They do. And you talk about in writing in general, my military experience seems to always come through with different things that I'm telling, especially on the military sci-fi side, because we can certainly talk about tactics and we can talk about weaponry and all those things. But for me, it's more along the lines of I'm trying to figure out how I put this, because it's not necessarily just those experiences. It's the overall experience of working with soldiers. And that's the thing that I miss the most about the Army right now, is that I don't work with soldiers on a daily basis anymore. And those relationships that you have with your, officer to officer and officer to non-commissioned officer, and then to the enlisted soldiers and whatnot, that's really the crux of how a unit operates. So being able to pull that in is huge, because it really builds a character base and builds an understanding of how those units function for a reader, which is a lot of fun to do.
It's an entirely different structure than what civilians are used to. Like, speaking as a civilian, because I have no military experience whatsoever. But it's I forgot where I was going with this, but yeah, it's an entirely different social structure. So yeah, that makes sense. I'm going to check Twitter to see if we have any Twitter comments really quickly. And while I'm looking, Larry says, thank you for your responses. And let's see here. I don't think I see any just yet. So now we're going to return to my questions. First of all, I haven't actually read the book yet. I hate to say, I thought I had pre-ordered it, and then the day came, and I was like, "Where is my book?" And then it turned out I hadn't pre-ordered it. So I am still running behind on that. So I want to ask: is the book primarily from the point of view of the modern characters, or do you also get into the heads of the historical characters as well?
A little bit of both. There's obviously a whole bunch of stuff that takes place. My cat is trying to get into the door.
You have the same problem.
I have the same problem.
I just, for everyone who is watching, before we started this, I actually had to kick my cat out because she has a habit of sleeping right near my power strip, and I knew that was going to end badly. And so at some point during this stream, you're probably going to hear my cat screaming to get into the room as well. I've told my husband to keep her behind, but you can step away and boot her away if you need to.
I might need to. Let me close the door real quick.
Oh, cat adventures. You're not an author unless you can speak of cat adventures.
And that's my fault because I totally, before I came downstairs to my office, I looked and the cats were in their cat tree just snoring away. I thought, okay, no problem. I can totally do this.
And then the tables turned. All right. I forgot where we were question-wise. Oh, remember my next question. Why?
So you just asked if I was talking from the perspective of the modern characters.
Yes.
So most of the book is written from the perspective of some of the modern cadets. But I also have the opportunity to write from George Washington's perspective and a couple of other folks, which is really it was challenging to do. But at the same time, it was really fun to be able to think about, okay, so we know historically what was going on and what the thought processes were. But now with this new information and this new change to things, how would they really react? What would be something that would be realistic for that to happen? And one of my favorite scenes in the book is actually the scene when Washington throws the quarter. And it's Washington and Nathaniel Greene. And it was just so much fun for me to write that, because that was one of the pivotal scenes that I had in mind. And be able to write that from George Washington's point of view was a lot of fun.
It's always great when you get to the point in a book where you get to write the main scene that inspired the book to begin with. Yeah. That's always something I look forward to as well.
It was another question.
Another question for you. Why are the cadets from 2008 specifically?
Well, it was just because that was one of the years that I taught ROTC. And it was from my perspective, being able to go back and be, okay, this is what we were teaching to the cadets. This is what the cadets would have with them on a typical field problem, going out and doing, squad tactical training kind of events. So kind of using that as the basis, it was just, it was going to be somewhere between 2008, 2010. And we just kind of stuck with 2008 and went with it.
Mm-hmm. Cool. All right, let's see here. Let's see. Well, one of my questions was, how challenging is it to write famous historical figures? But you kind of mostly covered that one. One thing I'd like to add, though, is that given that many readers already likely have a picture of how these historical figures should act, how challenging was it? Like, did you take modern conceptions or stereotypes of them into consideration, or did you just kind of do your own thing, whatever felt right?
I think you kind of have to do a little bit of both, and it's a very kind of a high wire act, if you will, because everybody has an idea of what these characters were, but then you also think about, well, history doesn't necessarily record things like, what was their sense of humor like?
Right.
Did they occasionally make the smart ass comment, something along those lines? I think it was fun to be able to go in and throw a little bit of humor into George Washington, and just his thought process, looking at a coin with his profile on it. What would that thought process be? And, I think for most of us, there would be both a feeling of, wow, that I must be really important. But then there's also kind of be like, who am I to be on a coin?
Right.
And
right, exactly.
So there was a lot of fun to be had there. And then as I introduced a couple of other historical figures from that era, knowing again what their role is in the future history at that point of the United States, and having them have things have changed for them. And so now you start looking at, okay, what's going to be the effect on Thomas Jefferson? What's going to be the effect on John Adams? What's going to be the effect on Congress and whatnot? So I think as if we're able to continue to move forward, I think we're going to have an opportunity to play with a lot of fun things there.
Nice. So there is a sequel in the works.
I have notes. It kind of comes down to how well the book does, and then hopefully I'm going to sit down and talk with Tony at Dragon Con and get the thumbs up to proceed. So
nice. Which is to say to everyone watching this, go buy the book. And actually, we just got a comment from Victoria on Facebook that says this interview is a success. I just bought the book. So thank you, Victoria.
Thank you very much, Victoria.
You're amazing. All right, let's see here.
Oh, hey, this is a good point to put out. Hey, Victoria, if you get the book, take a selfie with it. If it comes in before Tuesday, and you can enter into a drawing that we're doing where I'm drawing a $25 gift card every day of the first week of the release for someone who posts a selfie with the book and just tags me. That's all you got to do.
Yep, so. And you have full information on this about this on your Facebook page, right?
I do. Yeah, Facebook.com/author Kevin Ikenberry. Yeah, it's all there.
Yes, nice. So and how long? You said the contest is running until Tuesday?
Yeah, first week. So
all right.
Yeah.
Nice. All right. So plenty of opportunities. All right. Let's see here. I've already asked the one about military experience. Have I already asked this one? Which is more challenging to write, futuristic military sci-fi or historical military sci-fi?
So there's really no good answer there because they each have their own different challenges. But I think that the big thing for me and delving into history is you actually have a lot more history to work with. In the future, you kind of get a little bit of hand wavium. You can kind of extrapolate, okay, well, we have this type of technology that does X, Y, and Z. Mm-hmm. When you're working with history, you have to go back and, all right, what was really there? Right. What were the challenges? What were the things that even though the cadets come back with some technology it's obviously not going to work, but what are the things that they're going to be reliant upon? Is there something that they're not going to be good at because they were using their phone for it? Those types of things.
Yeah.
So being able to really kind of play with that. I think that each one of them has a different mindset, and certainly when I sit down, going from writing The Crossing into writing military sci-fi, there was a whole lot of, okay, wait a minute, I can I've got a little bit of leeway here. I can play with things because I didn't have to be so on to what was the tried and true method at the time.
Right. All right. Let's see here. Seems like we've covered a bunch of my questions inadvertently, so I'm having to read through them. Oh, while I'm looking at my questions, we have another good question from Chance on Facebook, and this one might require a little bit of thought. So let's see here. He says, have food products from bread to bananas been refined and altered chemically over the years? Do the cadets eat any food from this period? Because he thinks they'd barely be able to keep them down compared to the modern version of food.
So there's a couple of interactions where the cadets they're still eating their MREs, their meals ready to eat, their rations, but they're going to be eating food products from that period. And yeah, I would imagine there would be some intestinal distress at some point, but at the same time, I think there's going to be a lot of things that they're going to be able to work with. And I'm not going to have to delve too deeply into the different things that they're eating and such. I do think there would be a difference, absolutely. But I would also think it would be something that I think their gut biology would be able to adjust over a period of time.
Mm-hmm. Let's see. Justin just has a comment that you're largely you're marketing to a group that is largely historically literate, so you have a lot of pressure to get it right with alternate history, which is very true.
It is
alternate history crowd in particular.
That's one of the things that it's challenging to overcome as a writer, because you go in, you do the research and whatnot, and then you put it out, and so far comments have been very good about the research and whatnot, but I know that there's going to be somebody out there that's going to be like, well, you said this, and
yep.
Okay, you also have to take into account that it is fiction, and there's certain things that are going to I'm not going to say it's like a creative liberty or whatnot, because you can't really be too creative with alternate history, but at the same time, there's things that
it's a different kind of creativity with alternate history.
I agree. Yeah, I agree.
We have another comment here. Is it possible to enter your contest using ebooks somehow? Because it's hard to take a selfie with an ebook because it's on your phone and the camera is also on your phone.
So Victoria, send me a message on Facebook. We'll get you entered. That's easy.
Yeah. All right. So and Victoria was the one who commented. So we got you, Victoria. You're all good. All right. So, okay. I think you may have actually already answered this one too. Did any particular works of alternate history influence the writing of The Crossing?
So up until this point, until I had that conversation with Eric, I didn't really read a whole lot of alternate history. And Eric immediately, obviously, pointed me to 1632, and so I dove into about the first 5 or 6 books of that, and then he pointed me towards Time Spike in particular because that was kind of the book that we were riffing on what was going on with the project, if you will, that's here in the modern timeline that's kind of tracking this stuff, and that was going to be what his project. He was going to originally have a short story that was going to tag into the book that would kind of fill in the gap between Time Spike and the Alexander Inheritance and this particular book as far as what was going on the modern side of things. And unfortunately, that was not finished in time to get into the novel. I do believe it was finished. I'm not sure if there's any type of release time frame of when that might be coming out. But so I didn't really do a whole lot of alternate history reading at that point. But I've done a lot of I guess you could call it historical fiction, right? So reading through books like the classics of Killer Angels and the Gods and Generals and whatnot, all the works of Michael and Jeff Shara that look at American history and tell different things from that kind of fictional perspective, where you don't actually you don't have the transcript of what these these characters might have said. It's being made up by the author to kind of get things through. But those were something that I've read a lot of over the course of the last 20 years. So I think there was a lot of those that kind of played on things, especially when I was looking at writing those historical figures. But at the same time, alternate history was not something that was ever in my field of view, if you will, until I talked to Eric that first time, and then it's kind of now become its own thing.
It's hilarious how stuff like that happens in publishing too, because my husband who writes as Jacob Holo, he's got a book or a series now with David Weber, and the first book is The Gordian Protocol, which is this equal parts time travel, military, sci-fi, historical fiction. And Jacob never imagined that he was going to be writing historical fiction because he's a military sci-fi shooty, pow, blow up stuff kind of guy. And the way that ended up working out was David's the one with the historical background, so he handled the vast majority of the historical stuff. And Jacob is the engineer of the pair, so he designed all the sci-fi aspects of it. But if you had asked him at the start of his writing career if he would be writing any form of alternate history, he'd be like, nah.
No. never something even on my radar. And that was what even made it more doubly terrifying when Eric was like, well, write a manuscript. I was like,
yep.
Okay.
Yeah. When Eric Flint tells you to write a manuscript, you write a manuscript. Justin says your priorities can change rapidly when someone offers to pay you to write it. Yeah, it does.
Yeah, and the opportunity to work with Eric and have it be something that he was very passionate about was definitely a big factor in that. So that when he said get me a manuscript, that it became the number one priority until it was done and turned into him.
Oh, yeah. And then you write as fast as you can too. All right. Let's see here. And all right. Let's see. Man, even my printed stuff is illegible. Oh, here's a question for you. Now, the cover of this book is one of my single favorite covers of this year, just because it's one of those where you glance at it and you think you know what you're looking at, but then you have to just walk back to it and you're like, those aren't revolutionary soldiers. Did you have any input on the cover design, or was that all the artist?
I did. So it was something where when I was going through the writing of the book, in traditional publishing, you're not often given the opportunity to work with an artist or be able to take any input on a cover. I've been fortunate with the work I've done with Chris Kennedy Publishing. I've done all the cover design for all those books, and then the artists have made them come to life. And then with this particular book, when I got the email from Tony that we were going to go ahead and go to press, and you're going to be talking with the artist, this idea I'd had forever. It's taking the classic picture of Washington crossing the Delaware by Emanuel Lutz and taking that and changing a couple of things in the picture. I definitely wanted to keep George Washington. Obviously, that's the primary thing. The flag bearer also needed to be kept because that's a trivia question. Do you know who the flag bearer is in the painting?
I do not personally know.
So it's actually a future president of the United States, James Monroe, is depicted as the flag bearer. Yeah, and Monroe plays a part in the crossing. I won't spoil that. So,
Uh-huh.
but so I wanted to keep those two, and then change out the rest of the people in the boat, 2 soldiers, with the exception of 1 or 2 other folks in the back of the boat. And so that was my idea. And so I typed it up and sent it in, and the folks at Bain and the artist both looked at it, and the artist emails me. He's like, "Yeah, that's
Yes,
awesome." And so
perfect.
he got to work right on it, and Kieran Yonner he killed it. I mean, he sent me
Oh, he does great work anyway. I love everything he's done.
he sent me the first draft, and I just giggled. It was beautiful, and it really is a fantastic cover.
Oh yeah, it's a spectacular visual. I love it. It's one of my favorites. It's kind of a predictable question for alternate history, but given the opportunity, what historical figures would you like to meet in person?
Going through the research of the crossing, I would love to have the opportunity to talk to people on both sides of the conflict at that time frame, to really see what their thought processes were, and how things would play out if they were able to do them differently. Obviously George Washington and his staff, the different generals under his command, looking across at the British and the Hessians. There were a lot of things that I think that, from a tactical perspective, they did very poorly. They were good strategists, but they didn't do things at the tactical level very well. And being able to just kind of figure out, well, why did you do that, right? Why were you so worried about this when you should have been worried about that?
Mm-hmm.
And just try to kind of delve into that. I think historical figures, looking back through the course of American history. When I was working at Space Camp in Alabama, I had the opportunity. I've met quite a few astronauts, and several that have walked on the moon. And so when you talk about historical figures, I've had the opportunity to meet some. And the best part about that is that they're just as human being as you and I, and you have a conversation. My favorite story with that is my wife and I had dinner with Charlie and Dottie Duke several years ago. Charlie walked on the moon, Apollo 16.
Oh, wow.
And we're having this conversation, and it's a table full of people, and then at some point, conversation kind of lulls, and my wife leans over to Charlie Duke and says, "So what was it like?" Everything changed. His facial expressions changed. Rather than us having this animated conversation, it was very low key and talking about all the different things that he remembered experiencing. It was just a fantastic opportunity to do something like that. I would love to have that opportunity with anybody in the crossing, just to, hey, what was it like? Tell me from your perspective, what was this like? Because it's just fascinating what history provides us that is often missed.
Mm-hmm. This is completely unrelated to anything related to this book. But okay, so you ran Space Camp at one point, right? Yes. The millennial in me who grew up with the Space Camp movie from, what is it, the 70s? I can't remember how old this thing is.
It was made in, I think, 85, 86.
Yeah, it's by my standards, it's old. Do you have an opinion about the Space Camp movie as someone who has run Space Camp?
So it's a classic. It's one that if you work at Space Camp, you have to watch multiple times, because it's just part of the lexicon. One of my best friends is in that movie as one of the trainees.
Really? Oh my gosh, that's so cool.
Yeah, and of course, when you're there, there's so the big multi-axis trainer. It's the swinging rings, and when what's her name? Leah Thompson is in that, and she's trying to gain control. Right, you can't gain control of that thing. It's just a ride. And so we actually have that one that it was in a warehouse for a long time. I don't know if they've ever brought it out of storage, but it was kind of fun to see the different props that they used with the movie. But yeah, it's a classic. Now, I didn't say it was a great movie. It's just it's a classic that you have to watch if you work at Space Camp.
Some movies don't have to be great to still be memorable, which, I mean, can be said about a lot of my favorite movies, to be honest. I like to say that I enjoy a wide breadth of movies, which means that I enjoy genuinely good ones, but I also enjoy genuinely bad ones. It's like I've never had a movie that I've never been able to finish. I can always find something that I like in it. Let's see here. All right. So this is a very general question, but what's your writing history just in general? Like, what made you want to write to begin with?
So I was never one of those people that would tell you that at the age of like 6 or 7, they wanted to be a writer. I was told in high school I was a good writer. I was told again in college I was a good writer. And I got, truth in lending, I got an English minor because I was actually going to go to law school. I was going to be a lawyer. And so I wanted to have a good breadth of English knowledge, if you will, to write legal briefs and all that stuff. Mm-hmm. Of course, I threw all that stuff out the window after the Army. But it was never something that was on my radar. And then I was teaching ROTC back in, this was probably 2009. And I was the battalion executive officer. So I was the second in command. I ran all the staff and stuff. And I had what we called our battle rhythm down pretty easy. And so I could pretty much get my work done in the first few hours of the day. And it was an afternoon of, probably some idle Tuesday. And I started thinking about a character. Uh-huh. And so I pulled out the ever-present notebook and I started writing some notes. I got about 2 pages in and thought, well, this is a book. How do I write a book? And so even though I'd had a minor in English, I went back, being on a college campus, I talked to my commander. He's like, yeah, I took a college class. So I went back to creative writing again. And I turned in the first assignment and the professor asked me why I wasn't published. Oh. And I had no answer. And at that point, then with this auditing of the class that I did, my job was to submit short stories. So I wrote 3 or 4 short stories and submitted them. None of them were picked up for publication. But the professor, she was like, that's important because you got to earn that rejection merit badge. You get used to it. Mm-hmm. And then she said, just keep writing. And I did. And so from that point forward, until I sold my first short story in 2011, I sold my first novel, Sleeper Protocol. I sold it in 2014, and it was published in 2016, and just kind of went on from there. It was, like I said, never something that I ever dreamed of doing, and now it's something I can't live without doing. It's kind of fun.
It really amazes me how many authors start out that way. They're like, that was not me. I knew that I enjoyed writing in like the 4th grade, and I have a distinct memory of just having that I want to be an author moment. But so many people, especially in my immediate author community, like it's just something they fell into, which is just so fascinating to me.
I think a lot of us have always been creative people. And I think that most of us, I grew up in the South, so we were probably raised with the same kind of mindset. If you got to, make sure you're taking care of yourself and you get a good job and all that stuff. And you'd think that you would lose that creativity over time, and you really don't. And it just suddenly bubbles up, and then all of a sudden you're hip deep in it, going, what do I do with it? And it's finding the right people to work with, the right mentors, the right community, and then you're just kind of off and running.
Exactly. All right. Speaking of writing, what's your writing and plotting process? Like, are you an outliner or a pantser? Or do you have any particular writing rituals? Like, how does writing happen for you?
So you've now stepped into my parlor. So when I wrote my very first book, I was writing that book from the notes that I made in 2008. By the time that book saw publication, I had to cut about 3 chapters off the beginning, 4 or 5 chapters in the middle, because it was a god-awful mess, because I wrote it off the seat of my pants. I had no idea what I was doing, but I thought I understood story structure. And that's the thing with pantsers in particular. We do understand story structure. It's just there's a point where you look at typical plot structures and you feel like that might be, too literally a ball and chain. You don't want to have to deal with it because it feels like something you can't move. And when I was going through the idea process to ended up writing my second book, the first one I sold, Sleeper Protocol, it was kind of funny. So I had a foot surgery. So I was literally going to be on my butt for about 6 weeks. And I had this idea, and I had determined that I was going to do this differently because the first one had taken so long to write and was such a mess. I was going to do it differently. So I was going to look at story structure. So a couple days after my surgery, I'm sitting on the chair, got my foot propped up, I've got my laptop out. I'm going to outline this story. So I open up Microsoft Word, I flip it to outline mode thinking, I got this. I sat there and I was watching the blinking cursor of doom for about 2 minutes. And I finally just turned it off. I couldn't do it. And so I went to Facebook, and one of my friends, Lou Anders, had posted on his wall about an interview he had done with the Writing Excuses podcast, talking about 7-point story structure. And so I went back and listened to that. And as soon as it was done, I wrote a 12-page outline in about 3.5 hours.
Oh, nice.
But when I got done with it, something wasn't right. It just, there was something to me, from my pantser heart that just didn't work. And so I thought, well, maybe I missed something. So I went back, and Lou had done one prior to on his view of story structure, which is called Hollywood Formula. It's very screenwriting focus. And so I went back and listened to when Lou had done his interview with them on Hollywood Formula. I wrote another outline. And as soon as I got done with that outline, I looked at the two of them and thought, this would be perfect if I could mesh the two of these together, because there's different strong points for each type of outline. And I, closed Microsoft Word. I opened up Facebook again because I was sitting with my foot propped up because I wasn't moving anywhere. And my friend Lou had posted the exact same thing. And so I sent him an email and said, all right, this is what I'm doing. How do I do this? And so for about 6 weeks, and at the time, Lou was the editorial director of Pyre Books. So he was, very involved in the publishing process. And he basically, for about 6 weeks, sent me emails every day, chatting back and forth about character design and structure and how to make all this stuff work. So that now I call myself a plotter, because I do plot books, but because I have a little bit of a Panzer heart still left, I don't look at an outline as something that's written in concrete. It's something where there's opportunities for characters to do things and change. There's opportunities for me as the writer to look at what I've been writing and see if, am I on goal with what I wanted to do with the character, or am I off goal, or is there something where the goal of the character might have changed? Is there something that, interaction that I can mess with? Is there something that's going to be more of a hook from the emotional side for the reader? So as far as that process, I'm a plotter, but I do a lot of I've got that Panzer heart still, and I leave myself little outs as necessary, because every once in a while a character takes one, or I change something. I tell a story when I teach one of my writing classes that I was writing my Four Horsemen book, Fields of Fire. And I had this character who, her race in the entire 75 books of the Four Horsemen universe, they're reviled, they're horrible. But this one was a peacemaker, and she was really good, and she had a lot of honor, and she was mentoring a young human. And I was totally going to kill off the human. And I got to the climax of this book, and I decided it's got to be her.
Oh
no! And so I'm literally I'm about to write the death of the human, and I just stopped. And I just kind of sat there for a second. I said, I got to do this the different way. So I wrote that scene, and so I wrote the scene, and I'm just bawling. I'm crying as I'm writing the scene, and I go to bed thinking, that's probably the worst thing I've ever written. I should fix that tomorrow, and maybe just scrap the whole thing. And so I go the next morning to Starbucks, and I'm sitting at the high top table where the baristas are, right? And I'm editing, and I'm bawling.
It's simultaneously, those kinds of scenes are simultaneously the best and worst to write from a writer's perspective, because it's going to affect the reader a similar way that it's affecting you, but it's so hard to write sometimes. It is. It has to happen.
It was so incredibly difficult to write, and then I turn it in, and my first reader writes me back with like, "Really?"
I've gotten those emails before too. There's a character in my first novel that he's the kind of character that no one expects him to die. And then he does. And one of my now biggest fans, she picked it up, but within a few, I want to say a day or so of finishing the book, she got it. And the subject line of the email was, okay, first of all, why did you kill him? And it was one of those things too, where it's like, I didn't want to, but when I was looking at the story structure, the story kind of demanded it.
Yeah, it's one of those where it has to happen. It was funny. My dad sent me the character's name in a text, and I was like, yeah, I kind of had to, and he wouldn't respond to me for 4 days.
It's one of those one-word conversations where the word itself carries all the meaning.
Yeah.
All right,
I'm sorry, I was going to say, just in talking about rituals, I have a ritual that I do with my planning where I'm a very visual person. So when I start looking at characters and whatnot, I actually just take a bunch of easel paper and just stick it to the wall. And I just start writing notes about characters and kind of figuring out where I want them to be at the end. And then, bring it back to where they are at the beginning. And then what can I do to change them or mess with them, or what are their goals, and just kind of start breaking all that stuff out on a big kind of macro level. Then I can work through and develop the story structure from there that actually kind of fits that piece.
I have something similar that I do where I like to write outside and just like places. I travel around to write just because I live in an area with a lot of good parks and coffee shops and whatnot. And so I have this, I don't even know what to call it, but it's basically this sort of canvas thing I made where it's got little clear vinyl pockets in it. And I just take a bunch of index cards and write all my ideas and scenes down on those individual index cards. And I just shove them into little pockets and carry it around and reorder it. And it's just another little way of organizing.
Yeah, with day job, when I don't have the notebook, I have index cards available. So
Nice.
I understand.
We love our index cards. All right, we are down to the last 15 minutes. So if anyone watching has a question, now's the time to put it in. In the meantime, we're just going to continue chattering. And here's another super easy question to carry us out. What are your favorite books and who are your favorite authors in general? Like not necessarily alternate history or sci-fi, but just all over the place.
So some of my favorite books on the sci-fi side, I've always gravitated towards Heinlein Starship Troopers and Joe Haldeman's Forever War, especially when I was teaching ROTC, because the way I always kind of framed it was that Heinlein was teaching what it was like to take a small unit to war, and Haldeman taught a lot about what it was like to come home. And I've always gravitated towards those two books. I've tried to put those two into as many of the hands of the young cadets and the officers that I mentored over time. Just, hey, you need to read this. And just kind of from the standpoint of there's so much that we can learn from just how those characters were developed and how those books were written at the time that really focus on the strong points that you need to be an Army officer. I think from outside of the genre, if you will, I mean, we'll talk about science fiction. I've always gravitated to Arthur C. Clarke. I've always liked Heinlein as well. When I started, probably, I would imagine this would probably be right after I really started writing, and people were talking about having, that I should look at writing military science fiction. I think I read everything that John Ringo had put out at that point. Delved into, there were so many. David Drake, Hammer Slammers. Of course, I was as an Army guy in the tank. That I always loved those. And just, it was kind of like I didn't stop reading anything that wasn't military sci-fi for a while.
Mm-hmm.
Then I started looking at different things outside of the genre. One of my favorite books is actually the book version of The English Patient by Michael Angete. His prose, oh man, you ever want to read a book and think you can't write? Man, his prose is amazing.
I'm curious to check that out now because I've never even thought of that one.
Yeah, the book, of course, the movie is a good movie, but the book is just phenomenally written, and so it's the type of language that you hear people talk about. Language as a tapestry. That's what this guy is.
Ooh, I like those.
So phenomenal. One of the things that I actually do when I'm writing, when I'm in the middle of a fiction project, I read a lot of nonfiction, and so. Going back to, again, McCullough and David Hackett Fisher with the books around the Battle of Trenton. I do a lot of history reading now, especially as I start looking at what I could be doing with the books going forward. The works of Stephen Ambrose, Band of Brothers and whatnot. Those are all phenomenal books. So it just kind of depends on where I'm at with things. And again, if I'm in the middle of a project, it's probably going to be nonfiction, but I have a lot of things that I read otherwise that I just gravitate towards. I love them.
Cool. Oh, one other question. Now, you tentatively have a sequel in the works. Is there any potential of it going beyond a sequel, or do you mostly just have duology plans?
So I would love to make this a long-running series. So I think that if the sales and whatnot and the reception of the book is good, I have a pretty solid idea on where to go with book 2 and beyond. I think there's just a whole lot of stuff that can be played with and done in a way that it would be a fun read to really see what these modern kids are capable of doing in that time frame. So yeah, I would love to see it become a series.
Yay! Nice. All right, well, we are getting down to the last 10 minutes now, and I am out of questions. So do you have any other fun stories you'd like to tell about the writing of the book? Any fun things you researched? Any additional favorite scenes? Because I know you spoke about the one.
Sure. There was in working with Eric. Eric's editing was a little comical in a way, because as I was going through the manuscript, his edits, I would find these big blocks of text that were highlighted in yellow, and it would be like, "What are you doing here? You don't need to do that." and other questions, and then finally, about halfway through the book, there was this big block of text, and the general gist of the big blocks of text is, "Oh, I see what you're doing here. You don't have to do this. You don't have to answer all these things in one book, because there's going to be some sequels out of this." So hopefully he was prescient in that respect. So working with him was great, because he distilled everything down to that question: who gives a crap? And he was right, because it's something that I've taught it to the students that I've taught in writing classes. It's just something that you've got to have the capability to frame in your mind, because if you do that, it works very well. Another thing, as far as other fun things in the research aspect, when we're talking about the Battle of Trenton, I never knew in the beginning that the Hessians not only fell back, they actually tried to counterattack on a couple of occasions. And each of their counterattacks were shut down because Washington's troops were moving so quickly. And that was pretty fascinating to really look at what they were doing and their reaction, because again, we were taught, oh, they just kind of rolled over and played dead. And that's not what happened at all. They were trying to retain their formations and whatnot, and went from there. It was fun.
All right, we have another question in, and it came through a little funny. Would the sequels involve the fun of, let's see, turning in weapons to the Army then versus now? It can be interpreted a number of different ways.
So I think I know what Larry's talking about with that one. It's thankfully I can see what you're looking at too.
Okay, nice.
So it's he's talking about turning in weapons to the armory. So one of the things when you're training, especially in a training environment like when I was a cadet, you bring in your weapons, you have to clean them, and you have to turn them into the armory to the armorer is, and the armorer then inspects the weapon. And because you might not have the same weapon you had the day before, and the person that was had it before might not have cleaned it as well, turning weapons into an armory in some cases was something that took hours on end. And because you'd be cleaning this weapon, and they'd take the weapon, they'd find some obscure little spot and put the Q-tip in there, and it would be black, and then you'd be like, you have to go back and clean that. So I don't know if we'll do something along those lines. My favorite story from that, though, is when I was a cadet, we had come in from a field problem, and our NCO had it with the guy in the armory. He's like, every time we've got to turn in weapons, it's been a 3-hour experience. And so he basically brought in a milk crate full of cans of carburetor cleaner, the big aerosol cans, which you're not supposed to do, but it totally works. And so we basically had a line of people, and we were spraying the weapons down and then putting them in the hot shower to wash it all out. And we march up as a group to the armory, and the armorer's like, "Did you clean these weapons?" And our NCO comes up and goes, "I checked them." And he's like, "Okay." And he took all of our weapons in, which never happened, because it was always, that recurring, you got to clean this weapon again. You got to clean this weapon again. So.
Now, here's a question. Let me preface it by saying I know absolutely nothing about weapon cleaning. Why are you not supposed to use carburetor cleaner on it?
The theory was that it would actually harm the metal, and it would make it very difficult for the weapon to fire. So,
it makes sense. Cool.
Yeah, it was a little too corrosive, but it still worked pretty well.
Yeah, got the job done for that moment.
Exactly, it did.
All right, well, I don't think we have any other questions coming through, so I'm going to begin to wrap it up. So once again, guys, Kevin Ikenberry of The Crossing, which is out from Baen Books. You can go get it at Baen.com or everywhere else, or everywhere else that sells books, that is. And I think, Kevin, do you want to remind us about the contest again?
Sure. The contest is actually very simple. No purchase necessary. If you can go to a bookstore and find a copy of The Crossing, all you got to do is basically take a selfie of yourself with the book, and you get entered into a daily contest to win a $25 gift card to the bookstore of your choice. And then you're also entered into a grand prize drawing we'll do next Tuesday, which is a prize that is yet to be determined. Right? I know what it is, but I haven't announced it yet. So
it's a mystery prize.
So we'll probably make that announcement on Monday as far as what the grand prize will be, and then we'll actually do that drawing again on Tuesday afternoon sometime, and go from there.
Nice. Do you have anything else you want to add before I wrap it up?
It's been a phenomenal experience to bring this book to life. I like you said before, it's kind of bittersweet. I wish Eric were here to see it, because he was so passionate about it, and he relentlessly pushed and kicked me to make it work. And so not having him here makes it very bittersweet, but it's a beautiful book, and everything that I'm seeing from readers so far, they've really loved it. So
Oh yeah, it's
I hope
been
everybody,
reviews that I've
will
seen.
enjoy it.
They've been universally positive. So, oh, one last question, last minute question. Victoria asks, where do we post the book selfie?
So if you go to my Facebook author page, it's at facebook.com/author Kevin Ikenberry, all one word. That gets you to my author page, and that's where you post the selfie. If all else fails, you can send it to me directly on Facebook. We'll capture that. I've got a couple of folks that are helping me gather all these things and put them together. So we'll get you entered.
All right. Well, I believe that is it for us, Kevin. This has been a great Q&A session. So thank you for coming on with me. And thank you everyone for watching. So bye.